Hello class, we talked about this in class, we had a little lecture, but for those of you who are absent or already out of town, you know who I'm talking about. We're going to be recording this very briefly and I'm going to be running through it very quickly. Alright, so it might be advantageous for you to pause the video to write the definitions of these terms, because I will not be doing that. I'm just going to be giving examples so we can get through this. Okay, well we're going to be focusing on encoding. This is the first stage of memory before storage and retrieval, as we discussed in the last video. So just like in sensations and perceptions, we have processes of sensing and perceiving, whereas sensing the world around us is bottom-up processing, and perceiving those sensory stimulus from our environment is top-down. We have two types of processing in encoding. How the two types of processes of encoding into our brain, coding sensory stimulus from our environment into our brain. And the first is automatic processing. And as we learned from sensations and perceptions and from neuroscience, our brain is constantly being stimulated by billions and billions of bits of sensory information from our environment. Now, most of this information is being processed subconsciously because our brain can only, as we learned in sensations and perceptions and as we're learning now, our brain can only focus its attentional focus, its conscious focus, on maybe about 7 bits at a time. 7 bits of sensory stimulus at a time, give or take a few. Now, in the grand scheme of things, our brain's being stimulated by billions of bits, but we can only consciously focus on 7 of them. So for all those remaining billions, automatic processing is responsible for processing those bits in our brain. So for example, if you're sitting at your desk in class, you're not even thinking about it, and I ask you, hey, how do the socks feel on your feet? You weren't even thinking about the socks, that wasn't even close to what you were thinking about, or even near your conscious forethought. And so when I bring it to your attention by asking you about it, then your unconscious becomes conscious awareness, and then you start to reflect and think about how your socks feel on your feet. Now, prior to me bringing it to your attention, your brain was still processing that information. You just didn't realize it. So automatic processing is processing of space, time, frequency, and this is processing of information that takes absolutely no effort whatsoever. So like when you read a word in a book, you don't have to read the word and say, what is this? Let me think about this word. No, you can read it, automatically know what it is, and move on. This is different from effortful processing. Effortful processing requires effort. For example, you automatically will encode temperature. You will automatically encode how much time has elapsed in class. You can take a pretty good guess as to how much time has elapsed in class based on how much time you've spent there, without keeping track of time or anything like that. That's automatic. Effortful is like memorizing vocabulary terms or memorizing major concepts in psychology. It's much harder to comprehend these concepts and understand the intricacies of them. So because of that, we have to rehearse or repeat these concepts by using flashcards or using Quizlet. That's why we have flip videos the night before, and then when we come to class, we talk about it again in class, then we talk about it the next day in our test review, and then you see it again on the test, and then it's on our review that you take home. The reason why you see these concepts so many times is because I'm trying to enforce effortful processing on you. I'm trying to force you to read these words and go over these concepts multiple times so you can rehearse, and lock that in your memory bank. Now, most of the concepts in this are straightforward, but this one's a little bit more complex. There's no one name bigger than this man here when it comes to the study of memory in psychology, and his name is Hermann Ebbinghaus. Now, despite the fact that his experiments would not really be considered valid today, the results from his experiments are still considered valid. What he did is he went into a room, he organized a sequence of numbers and letters, kind of like license plates, but much, much longer, just long, long lists of numbers and letters, and he'd go into a room and he'd try to memorize these numbers and letters just by himself. So he performed experiments on himself by himself. This would not really be considered valid today, however, the results are considered valid and they're widely accepted even today. All right, so the first concept, first principle that he developed from these experiments is called the spacing effect. And the spacing effect is the tendency for distributed study or practice to yield better long-term retention than that is achieved through mass study or cramming the night before a test. So for example, if you cram the night before a test, you will retain that information more efficiently the next day for that test. Why? Because when you cram right before you sleep, you are storing easily retrievable information in your short-term memory. So when you go to sleep, those short-term memories are the most easily retrievable when you reach REM sleep. And so because of that, those dreams are locked into your memory during REM sleep. So the next day when you wake up, those memories are more retrievable in your storage. However, that's only for the next day. But what about day 2 or day 3, day 4? What about a month from now? What about several months from now when you have to take that AP exam? You will forget probably everything. Okay, cramming is effective for remembering the next day, but cramming is terrible for long-term retention. This is why you need to utilize the spacing effect. All right, this is when you spend about 15 minutes on a concept one day, and then you spend about 5 minutes on it the next day, and then 10 minutes on it the day after that. The more you revisit a concept, the more dendrites and neural network and neural connections you create. And that is what leads to long-term memory storage, is when you develop neural networks, as we discussed in neuroscience. The other principle that Hermann Ebbinghaus developed is the serial position effect. The serial position effect is our tendency to recall best the last and first items in a list. In other words, it's the ability to recall best the first and last bits of information in a study session. So for example, if you look at your outline for any given unit in this course, and you study that outline in order every night, that's good use of the spacing effect. However, you're going to be almost an expert at the first 5 concepts and at the last 5 concepts, but you will have a tendency to not be as experienced in the middle concepts because of the spacing effect. This is why it's so important for you to include an introduction and conclusion in your research papers. Why? Because it's a human nature, natural tendency to forget bits of information in the middle. So that's why you have to introduce some and then wrap it up and tie it all together in the conclusion, so you can remind the reader of what you discussed in the body of your paper. Now these are really, really easy. What we encode. There's acoustic encoding for encoding auditory stimulation into the temporal lobe. There's visual encoding for encoding visual information in the occipital lobe. And then there's semantic encoding. This is Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe, and this is the encoding of word meanings. Now, the initial encoding of word meanings will take effortful processing. Like we said, you have to use rehearsal. You have to use Quizlet or flashcards or whatever your personal technique is for memorizing vocab. And once you have memorized that word and you know it, you have a solid foundation and experience in it, then it becomes automatic processing once you see it from then on out. Okay, so initially semantic encoding does take effort, but once that word is learned and solidified in your brain, then from then on out it only requires automatic processing. Imagery. Imagery is mental pictures. So schemas is an example of imagery. Cognitive maps is an example of imagery. So social schemas or gender schemas. A picture of what it means to be a man or a picture of what it means to be a woman in your head. That's all imagery. Yes, I can't believe this is an actual bold-faced word in an AP textbook, but we have to cover it anyway. And then the last thing we will discuss are mnemonic devices. Mnemonic devices are memory aids utilizing the effectiveness of imagery to enhance long-term retention. All right, so the 3 mnemonic devices that we're going to discuss are chunking, the method of Loki, and the peg word. The peg word is the mnemonic device where you make a jingle or a rhyme to aid in memory. For example, a change in time saves 9, or I before E except after C. Or, hey, in 1492, who sailed that ocean blue? It was Christopher Columbus. So that's like an example of the peg word, how we use a jingle or a little rhyme to memorize. The method of loci is associating memorized information with a location. That's why at the beginning of the year, I forced you guys to sit in a seating chart for the first week of school. Why? So I could associate your name with your seat in the class so I could better memorize your names. That's why I was pretty good the second week of school. I had most of your names down by that point. All right. Another example of method of loci are maps. Okay, so like if I showed you a map of Pennsylvania, and I said, hey, there's a map of Pennsylvania, point to the city that has that is the number one steel manufacturer in Pennsylvania. Most of you would probably quickly point to Pittsburgh. So that's another example of method of loci. It's where you associate any bits of information with a specific location. All right, and then the last one is chunking. Chunking is organizing items into familiar, manageable units. Often occurs automatically. For example, phone numbers. When you give someone a phone number, you don't just say ba 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 ba. You don't just say 5 numbers or 7 numbers right off the bat. You don't go up and say 5555555. No, you say it in a pattern. 555 55 55. Right? Why do we do this automatically? Why do we not think about it? Why do we just do it? The reason is Gestalt psychology. Our brain organizes information into patterns and groups. Why? To make the processing more efficient, faster, and enabling us to move on to more novel stimuli. Okay, another example of chunking is the alphabet. When you learned the alphabet as a child, you chunked it. You might not realize it, but you did. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now I know my ABCs. Next time won't you sing with me? That is chunking. Acronyms are also chunking, like SOHCAHTOA, or FACE. FACE is for sheet music, in case you don't know. All right, well, that's it. We're done. All right, see you guys next time.